Voice matters, voice matters. Welcome, voice friends, to another episode of Interviews on Voice Matters. My name is Liz Johnson, and today we have Aaron Johnson with us. No relation, but we're both in the field of vocology, so here we are. It's been a minute since I've published an interview, so it's really exciting to be back and doing this again, and I really appreciate your time today. Aaron, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Just to give a little background on Aaron, I mean, where do we start? His CV is extensive. He is a legit voice researcher. He is currently, let me look at my notes here. He's currently the co-director of the Langone Voice Center at NYU in New York City. And I most recently know him through the Pan American Vocology Association because you were the president from 2019 to 2021, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. And you have a master's degree in music, so you're a singer, you're a musician. Famously, you're on the internet. The inside of your skull is on the internet. The singing in the MRI video that we all know and love. Well, at least I know and love.
I have a fun new video for you that I'll share with you today too.
That's awesome. We'll put links to these things down in the description box here. You can find more about Aaron at voicescientist.com. And I have to say, nice score on that web domain. You deserve it.
Thank you. I grabbed it a long time ago. Just wanted a place to, park myself on the internet just so I had a go-to place, and got lucky that I did that early enough to get that nice domain. So that's, Voice Scientist is my website. It's also all of my my handles on social media, although I'm not that active on social media, but you can find me at Voice Scientist on Instagram, Twitter. I think those are the two main ones.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Yeah. Easy enough, right?
Yep.
And legit, I mean, your CV goes on for pages. You've published extensively. And I have to read this one line out of your CV that I think is so neat. We may or may not get to it, but one line says, "One key accomplishment in this area is my development of a novel behavioral animal model, training rats to increase their ultrasonic vocalizations, allowing for mechanistic studies of the laryngeal muscles that are not possible in humans." That sounds utterly fascinating. I'm sure we could talk about that for 10 hours, but you also have done lots of research on aging voice. So there's just a lot to dive into here. So let's start from the beginning. One of the things that I think is very fascinating is, where do we come from? What makes us interested in this field? And so how did you get started in voice science?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I have a master's in music. My first career was as a professional singer and teacher of singing. And so that was my sort of how I was introduced to the health and science of the voice through connections when I was in Chicago, which is where I trained and performed for over a decade. I was part of the Chicago chapter of the National Association of Teachers of Singing. I also was part of the Chicago Singing Teachers Guild, which is a now defunct organization, but actually was one of the founding organizations of NATS. So it was around back from, I think, the 1930s it was started. Wow. And even though it said Singing Teachers Guild, it actually was a multidisciplinary organization of people interested in the voice in Chicago. And I joined it back in, well, quite a while now, 20 plus years ago. And at the time, vocology was a word that had started to emerge, but I wasn't familiar with the word vocology. The vocology field was really just blooming. But this was an organization that was consisted of speech pathologists, singing voice teachers, laryngologists, and I got to meet Dr. Bob Bastian and Marina Gilman. Dr. Bastian is a laryngologist in Chicago who has a voice center. Marina Gilman is a speech pathologist who was at the Bastian Voice Institute at the time, then went on to Emory Voice Center, and now is retired, but is still a good friend and colleague of mine. Just saw her at the PAVA, Pan American Vocology Association Symposium, actually. And that was the first time I had observed and learned about laryngology and looking at the voice and speech pathology, and I got really excited about this other direction that I could potentially take my career, because I had been teaching and singing and loving it for 10 years, and I was about 30 years old and was sort of thinking, well, what's the next iteration? And to excel in one of those areas would mean to probably move to get a teaching job that was full time, or to perform more, which would mean more traveling. And neither one of those was appealing to me for sort of personal reasons. And so I discovered these two fields, laryngology and speech pathology, and sort of decided, well, which one do I want to do potentially? And I decided not to become a medical doctor, not to become a laryngologist, which is, as my colleague Paul Kwok likes to say, just the T of the ENT. So just ear, nose, and throat. He's a laryngologist and just studies the throat.
That's funny.
But laryngologists are essentially surgeons. And I was like, well, I don't really want to be a surgeon. I want to continue working with people, training people, being involved with helping people change the way they're using their voice, because I really enjoyed being a singing voice teacher. And so speech pathology was the logical next step. And so I took the prerequisites, which took about a year in Chicago at a couple different institutions, and then got into the master's program at Rush University in Chicago with the intention of staying in Chicago and being a clinician. However, I was warned as I was entering the field that speech pathology was a broad field, that the degree, the master's of speech pathology that you need to become a speech pathologist was a generalist degree by necessity, because there's so many things that speech pathologists need to know about that they can treat across the span of communication disorders, and voice was a tiny, small bit of that. So with that in mind, I was advised, I don't remember by whom exactly, but I should maybe go to the Summer Vocology Institute. And so that's the short answer. The long answer is leading up to this, but the short answer, how did I get interested in voice science? How did I, really get the vocology bug? It was my summer back in 2005, where I went to Denver. Now they host it in Utah, but at the time it was in Denver with Ingo Tietze, which anyone who's watching this and follows your work, I'm sure knows Dr. Ingo Tietze. But I worked with him, and also learned from Kitty Verdolini, another very popular name and founder of the field of vocology, and that blew my mind. Right, that's just, I said,
Right?
whoa, okay. These are new ways to think about the voice, to understand how the voice works. I mean, that was life altering, and really kind of got me interested in the scientific aspect of the voice. And so that led me to then want to get a PhD so I could be involved in research. And so after completing my clinical degree in speech pathology at Rush University, I headed up to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which has long been a bastion of both clinical and basic research and clinical services in voice, with many, many researchers and clinicians, great community, which is why I went. And at University of Wisconsin-Madison, I worked with Dr. Nadine Connor, who was my primary mentor. And she does basic science work with rats and looking at tongue exercise and how that can treat weakness in the tongue, and how we can use that model to learn about mechanisms, neuromuscular mechanisms of tongue exercise. And
Wow.
so, to your point earlier, that is where I was introduced to basic science and in rat models, because prior to that, I had no experience. Quite honestly, I'd never even taken a course in biology. I skipped that in high school. So it was a lot of on-the-job learning and training, working with her.
That's incredible. So, are you continuing to do mouse research or research on mice to this day? Is that something you've carried forward?
Yep. So that's actually sort of my bread and butter research. So when I was at Wisconsin and learning this rat model of tongue exercise, I did that to train and get all those basic skills. And then for my dissertation work, I wanted to sort of bring that model back down to my favorite organ, everybody's favorite organ, the larynx, and thought, well, how can I train rats to use their larynx more? And I was very fortunate that a now colleague and good friend of mine, Dr. Michelle Chucci, had just arrived at Madison as well to do her postdoc, and she's now on faculty there. For many years she's been on faculty, and she brought with her this model of training rats to increase their ultrasonic vocalizations, and she was using that to look at brain mechanisms in a Parkinson disease model, a rat model of Parkinson disease. And I thought, well, if she's using that to train them to vocalize more, then wouldn't they be using their, vocal muscles, their laryngeal muscles more? And so we did some studies to sort of investigate if that were true, and it seemed to be. So my dissertation was the first study of using this behavioral rat model to increase rats to increase their vocalizations and therefore increase their laryngeal muscle use. And we looked at some properties of the muscle, particularly the neuromuscular junction, which is the point where the peripheral nerve communicates and attaches to the muscle. And it's that point of contact that where the signal goes over to the muscle to say, hey, muscle, contract now. And that changes with aging and exercise. And so we showed some differences in this rat model in the thyroarytenoid muscle, the primary muscle of the vocal fold, with training, and how it ameliorated some age-related changes. And since then, we've been continuing to do work in that area. In fact, I've got a group of 8 rats that are being trained right now. Maybe even right now as we speak, I've got a staff and students in my lab that are now doing all the hands-on work, and I get to sit in my office and write and think and write grants and papers and such. But so I don't do a lot of hands-on rat work anymore myself.
So ultrasonic, we're talking about sounds that the human ear can't pick up.
Precisely. So when you see, if you happen to have a pet rat or mouse, if they're with another rat, and even with you, maybe they might be communicating with you and you wouldn't even know it, because their happy communications are around 50 kilohertz. And the human hearing and young healthy hearing goes up typically to about 20 kilohertz. So we're talking, over twice the range of what we can, the upper limit of what we can hear. And the mechanism of that is actually not tissue vibration like we produce our vocalizations as humans, where the vocal folds come together and vibrate, but rather the vocal folds come together and create a very small hole. And then there's a jet of air that is created through that small hole that then resonates within the larynx. And there's a little bit of still some debate about the precise source of that resonance. But we do know that the laryngeal muscles are involved in producing and, importantly, modulating the frequency of the vocalizations. So if you slow down these vocalizations into our range of hearing, they sound like bird calls. They're these kind of whistle, because they're an air jet, it's a whistle mechanism, but they can be rapid trills and harmonics and really quite complex. But of course, they're happening within the span of hundreds of milliseconds. So they're short and much higher than we can hear.
So how are you recording these sounds then? Are you using I'm assuming specialized equipment, and then you said slowing it down?
Yeah, so we actually do it exactly the same as we would human
Mhm.
vocalizations, except that our equipment, instead of topping out at 20 kilohertz, goes up to, I think our microphones have sensitivity up to 120 kilohertz, and then our sampling rate is much faster, because you need to sample it at twice the frequency you'd like to capture. So we're sampling at again, I think we're 150 or greater kilohertz, so that we can capture these 50 kilohertz vocalizations. And then we create spectrograms, just as we would with
Okay.
human vocalizations. And we can then measure things like the frequency, the duration. We calibrate our microphones for intensity, so we can look at changes in the intensity of the vocalizations. We look at the frequency modulation. We have a couple different measures of complexity of the vocalizations, because
Okay.
we are trying to actually get them to have more complex vocalizations as part of the training. So
Mm.
instead of a short little kind of sound, we want them to go like that, kind of up and down, quick vocalizations, because that's, again, utilizing the same muscles that we use, the thyroarytenoid and the cricothyroid muscle.
Wow. This is so great. I can't say enough about how wonderful it is to talk personally about this stuff, because you hear papers at, conferences, but rarely do you get to sit down and actually discuss this stuff. So thank you again. So it, there's a couple things. I don't want to get too far off track from like where you've come, like your
Sure.
history. So one of the questions I would like to discuss is like, implications for this. Like how are you applying it? How is the field thinking about it? And where's this going? But before we do that, let's go back to how did you end up in New York?
Sure, sure. So, as I finished my PhD at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I also finished my clinical fellowship in the clinic there. So I basically, up until that point, had been sort of gathering skills and degrees and preparing to do something in voice, in vocology. And when I was looking for a job, I sort of was faced with the choice to go into a traditional academic position where I would be able to try to get funding and continue this basic science work, because you need money, and essentially the National Institutes of Health is the primary funding institution, and so that requires a lot of kind of specialized equipment and support, and you need a kind of a traditional academic position. I can't
Mhm.
like open up my own shop and do this kind of thing. So that was on one hand. The other hand was I sort of had a little inkling of coming back to the singing voice world, and thought, well, maybe now that I've done all this training and I've learned this science, I could go back and find a teaching position and be a full-time voice teacher, singing voice teacher, but with a specialty in the science and in the pedagogy aspect. And so I actually had an opportunity at an institution where I had to go back and audition and sing, which, I had to do a mini recital, which I hadn't done for 5 years and was totally out of shape. It was one of the most stressful interviews I've ever done. But I was offered the position, and at the same time, I was offered a couple other positions in more of the speech pathology, kind of that basic science realm. And I decided to go ahead and dive into the basic science because I thought that was my chance. If I
Mhm.
interrupted my work, then it would be difficult, if not impossible, to come back to that kind of work.
Yeah.
Whereas I thought, well, I could probably, get back into teaching singing at some point if I wanted to. That's a sort of there was more opportunities to do that down the road. And so I took a job at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and
That's my
and
alma mater, by the way.
oh, it is. Oh,
Yes.
great, great.
Yeah.
Well, it was a great job, and I intended on being there a long time. I have three kids that at the time were in, when we moved there, preschool, elementary school, and middle school. Now they're in high school, and one about to start college and one a senior in college. So that was how long ago that
Wow.
was. And so I thought, well, we've got it's a good, comfortable place to live in Urbana-Champaign. We had a big house. I could walk to campus. I had a nice tenure track job. I had great colleagues, good support. Everything's good. So I was like, good, I'm here for the long term. And then at a conference, my now colleague Ryan Bransky, who I knew professionally, who has been with the NYU Voice Center for many years, he's actually now taken a different role at NYU. He's in the Department of Rehabilitation and more of an administrative research
Hmm.
position. But he is a speech pathologist and researcher like myself. And he approached me at a conference we had. Actually, the story is I saw him across the way. It was the last morning of the conference. And by the last day of a conference, everyone's kind of tired and socialized out. But I waved him over because we hadn't talked, and he sort of begrudgingly came over to talk to me. And we chatted. And I'd mentioned how I had brought my son to New York for the Matilda open call. And that sort of got him thinking, maybe Aaron would be interested in coming and joining us at NYU because they were looking to expand.
Wow.
So he called me and he said, we're hiring this laryngologist, Paul Kwok, who was trained at Juilliard as a collaborative pianist and wants to do more with professional voice and singers. And with your background, we thought you'd be a good to bring on with him. It'd be a nice match. And with your research, we can support that here at NYU. And I said, no
Wow.
way. There's no way I'm coming to NYU. I'm comfortable here. Bring my family to New York City. That's crazy.
Right.
And he said, well, come on out and free trip to New York if nothing else, and just check it out. I was like, all right, I can't pass that up. So I came and saw that this really was an incredible opportunity for me, not only to do research and have colleagues within the voice world, but also to go back to the clinic and work with singers, work with individuals clinically, which I didn't have the opportunity to do in my traditional academic position at Illinois. So now, as of almost 6 years to the day, we're close to my 6-year anniversary. I've been a part-time clinician. I work a couple mornings a week in the clinic, and then part-time as a researcher. And then I also get to do a little bit of education as well, teaching a vocology class at the downtown campus for our master's students in pedagogy.
Mm.
And I think this is maybe breaking news. I posted on LinkedIn, but your show will be sort of breaking news. I've just developed a vocology certificate program through the School for Professional Studies. So it will be starting in October of this year, 2020 to
What?
2022. I'll be teaching the Fundamentals of Vocology course, which is sort of an overview of vocology and some of the material from Dr. Tietze's Principles of Voice Production.
Yep.
And then there'll be 4 other courses that relate to measurement of the voice, so instrumentation and measurement, an overview of voice disorders, and then a research for the vocalogist class, as well as a voice habilitation course that'll cover a kind of overview of singing and acting voice training. Really inspired by my time at the Summer Vocology Institute. And I've come to find that not everyone can devote a summer and go out to Utah to study vocology. So I'm not trying to compete with SVI. I still think everyone should go do that if they can.
Agreed.
But I'm trying to offer vocalogy training to people that may not have that accessible to them. So this is online. It's going to be 8 weeks,
Whoa.
1 hour a week in the evenings, and then again, a series of these 5 courses. And I'm just very excited that I have the support from the School of Professional Studies. I'm going to bring colleagues in. It's not going to be the Aaron Johnson show. I'll have other colleagues coming in to teach the courses and interact with our students, but I'm super excited about that. So NYU has been great. I've had so many opportunities, so much support, great colleagues, 6 years running and not a single regret. It's fantastic.
That's huge news. Huge. Because people are hungry for this. They
I think
want the
so.
information and they want the help. And oh my gosh, well, congratulations on that. And I'm
Thank you.
so glad that you're mentioning it and that this is going to get out maybe to, I don't know, 5 people. Who knows? But I'm kidding. So this is fascinating to me because you get to do the research. So you have all these questions going on in your brain. How do you apply them? And then you get clinic days. How is that informing your research and your practice? I mean, it's like a dream. It sounds like a dream to me because what are we doing in the studio all day long? Experimenting, trying sounds, like trying all this stuff on, but then you've got this specialized research going on. Are you working with aging populations? Like, how is this dovetailing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so some of the basic science work I'm doing, and you had sort of alluded to this question earlier about what are the implications. All that stuff with rats, which seems like, well, what do rats have to do with human vocalizations? Especially they're whistling. They're not even, vocal. They're not using their tissue to vibrate and create phonation, so to speak. Well, all of this work with rats and my basic science research is inspired by my time in the clinic and as a singing voice teacher. The big question that I'm trying to answer is, what is vocal exercise? So when we talk about exercising the voice,
Mhm.
what do we mean? Can in traditional exercise, the goal is to strengthen muscles for a
Mhm.
particular task, or to improve and increase endurance to do a task longer.
Mhm.
And so can we actually do that to the muscles of the voice? And specifically with my research, I'm looking at the muscles of the larynx. Now, for most of the population, that question is irrelevant. Most people go around, they talk, they use their voice, they don't really care, they never think about it.
Yeah.
But on 2 ends of the spectrum, we have folks that need to use their voice in athletic ways. So that would be our singers, actors, vocal professionals who are doing things with their voice that are athletic, above what normal, typical people do with their voice. And that's my background as a singer and teacher. On the other end of the spectrum are individuals who have some sort of weakness, some sort of disability or pathology that's preventing them from using their voice in what we would consider a typical or normal way. And so that's where the aging population comes in. As we get older, the muscles of the voice, including the larynx, tend to weaken and atrophy, get smaller, just like all of the other skeletal muscles within our body.
Mhm.
And so in the clinic, we see folks come in, older adults, and it can happen at any age. In fact, this process called sarcopenia, which in Greek is poverty of the flesh,
Mhm.
is the name for this age-related atrophy and decrease in muscle strength and size. And that happens beginning in our 30s. So I'm not talking about a hard cutoff at, the retirement age of 65, but really can be 60s, 70s, beyond that is when we typically see people come in. They don't have any other problems with their voice. There's no nodules, polyp cysts, lumps or bumps, anything like that. But we see a little bit of bowing to the vocal folds
Hmm.
because the underlying muscles have gotten smaller, they've atrophied and weaker. And so they can't quite get their vocal folds together all the way. There's a little bit of a gap, which can create some breathiness. It can create some irregularity in the sound, some roughness. And I saw 11 patients yesterday, and at least half of them had some component of this problem, um, along with maybe other things. But so that aging population saying, can we exercise? Can we improve the strength and endurance of the voice for these individuals whose voices have weakened over the years? That's really the inspiration. And then trying to come up with interventions within the clinic. And I've got other colleagues around the country that have come up with specific sort of voice strengthening programs that can improve the voice. But there's also a role for medical and surgical management as well, which is why I love working with my physician colleagues, really side by side. We see patients at the same time together in clinic, and it's a great opportunity for me to be engaged with the latest and greatest advancements in laryngology as well. So yeah, being in the clinic, back to your original question, is just inspiring for me and helps me contextualize what I'm doing in the basic science lab. And also we do, as a team, we do clinical research as well, looking at different interventions. I
Mm.
did a project actually while at Illinois that was just published looking at the use of iPads and supporting older adults in doing daily voice exercise
Mm.
with feedback through an iPad, through a tablet. And so continuing in that sort of mobile health space is something I'm very interested in as well. Lots of people who older adults, or actually just anyone in Manhattan even, have a hard time getting around. We think of telemedicine as something that's good for rural areas, but you try getting from South Brooklyn up to Manhattan Central and
No, thanks.
for a half-hour appointment. So increasing accessibility through telemedicine, through mobile health is something that I'm really interested in as well, and have some exciting projects coming down the pipeline that I can't quite talk about yet because they're still in development, but keep an eye on that space as well.
How exciting. We'll just have to do another interview at some point in
We'll
time so
do
you
that.
can
Yeah.
actually talk about your top secret missions. This is great though. So do you find ever in the clinic that something happens and it inspires your research brain, like kind of helps you to think? You said contextualize, obviously, but have you ever had a moment where you like directly experience something with a client or a patient and then boom, it just made a full connection for you? I know it's a little vague, but
Yeah. Well, let's see. I mean, there's kind of one of my stock stories that I can share with you, and it's stock because I've been telling it for so long. Actually, the inspiration, part of the inspiration for me, even looking at training the aging voice in a clinical setting, came from my time as a voice teacher.
Mm,
So I had been teaching at Elmhurst College, just outside of Chicago, now Elmhurst University, in their community voice program. And I had an individual come to me. She was a retired teacher, and she'd always loved to sing, and had never taken lessons. And when she started with me, she had sort of what we might say is a stereotypical older adult female voice. It was a little wobbly. She couldn't really sustain phrases that long. It was sort of breathy. And I ashamedly admit that I was ageist at the time. I really had low expectations. I thought, well, this will be fun. We'll sing some folk songs and some music theater stuff that she wants to do. And I unfortunately had low expectations. But fortunately, she taught me a lesson at just how much improvement anyone can make at any age, because she
right.
practiced harder than my college students, and she really just made tremendous gains in what we might call the strength of the voice.
Hmm.
So the ability of her to sing longer phrases. I remember we worked on Scarborough Fair initially, and she couldn't get through that first phrase, and after a few months of training she could do that first phrase in one breath. That was a huge goal for her. The pitch was much more secure. The vibrato narrowed and became more manageable. And so all those things that we say is like strengthening the voice. But, of course, I had no idea at the time about what was happening with the muscles. And if it
Wow.
truly was strengthening those muscles. So, I heard a big debt to teaching me about my own biases and false assumptions about the older voice, and really inspiring me to investigate. So I take that experience and I take what I've learned in the lab to my older adults now who come in with voice problems, and I talk about the importance of, use it or lose it, that old mantra of you got to keep using those muscles. And I see people who start to practice regularly come in after a course of voice therapy and have improved dramatically.
That's
And they're not as breathy, their voice is more regular, doesn't have the roughness. And so that really inspires me to continue looking at those underlying mechanisms, saying, well, what's really happening with these muscles? What kind of difference are we and can we make in these older adults?
And outside of even adults, because I know what you're talking about, I've had several older folks come in and we do the work, we do exercises, and stuff starts to get better, and they're amazed,
Hmm.
you know. But on the other hand, even younger folks, it strikes me as interesting that a lot of times they come in and there's this like unconsciously held belief that it's not going to get better,
Mm,
like, and they kind of, and I can't say this for sure, but sometimes I just get the feeling that it's like, well, that's just how it is.
yeah,
But thinking of it in terms of exercise, like if you go to the gym and you do the work and you vocalize and do exercises that help improve your form and function, things do get better. And it's shocking to people. And that's why this is so exciting to me, because there's something that can be done and there is science starting to support that. Do you ever have that happen in the clinic? Like people come in and they're kind of like, oh, well, we'll try this, I guess. And it actually works and they're
yeah.
amazed. Like,
Yeah, so putting on my vocologist habilitator and rehabilitator hat on a little bit, there's a couple of things that underlie that I see a lot. If we're talking about singers and specifically kind of the being able to sing, I have found that people people think that there's a book called The Talent Myth, and I can't remember the author, but we can put it in the show notes here.
okay,
The talent myth, which basically talks about in any realm, including they don't I don't know if they talk about singing in particular, but if you look at any elite performer, so the Williams sisters, for example, or Tiger Woods, any sort of elite athlete, and people look at them and they say, "Oh, they're so talented."
hmm, right.
Well, that to me, that's so insulting to them, because if you really I just,
Yeah,
I watched the King Richard film recently, and you look at sort of their, which is the story of the Williams's father and in them and their early training. And you look at any elite athlete who's top of their game, and they have been training and putting in the deliberate practice hours for years and years and years. And it's not just talent. Maybe at the elite level, there's some difference in muscle fiber type. Maybe someone who sings at the Met versus who sings at regional opera, maybe they have a little bit advantage of certain muscle fiber types that help them sustain their voice over long periods of, but who knows?
sure.
We don't know. But in terms of, someone saying, oh, I am a singer or not, or I'm not talented or I am, right? That's just a misconception. Anyone can sing, anyone can change the way they use their voice, but it takes practice and it
Yeah,
takes developing new habits.
yeah.
Habit development is another area that I've become really interested in. There's a lot of good books out there: Tiny Habits, Atomic Habits.
Yes, yes.
Um, there's another one. There's three kind of big habit books that I've gone between. But just the idea that that if we want to develop a skill or a new way of doing something,
Mhm.
we have to set up the conditions for us to do it. And so if we think about training or therapy of the voice, like I saw a teacher yesterday, and she's done great in therapy, and she starts school next week, and she's really nervous that now she's going to be in school and she's going to forget her techniques. And I said, yeah, you are. You're
Yeah,
going to be thinking
yeah,
about your kids and
yeah.
about your lesson
True.
plans. And so set some reminders. Put a reminder on your phone, an hourly chime that says, how's your voice doing? Put some sticky notes up on your board or on your computer monitor that says, check in with your voice. you've got to build in the environment reminders and
Mm,
triggers to do these new habits and integrate them into your life. So yeah, and so I run into that all the time in people
yep,
not thinking that they have the ability.
yep.
And so I think that has to do with the talent idea that people just can or cannot use their voice in certain ways. And the other thing I'll mention related to that is in singers in particular, they tend to um, uh, per personify their voice, sometimes like name their voice and externalize it in a way.
Mhm, mhm.
Like the people talk about the voice. Oh yes, well, my voice, right? There's this like, sort of
Yeah.
separate from them. Yeah, it's out there somewhere. And when people do that, they lose agency, I think, over their voice, and they think that things are happening to their voice, and yes, you can have allergies, you can get a bad night's sleep, you can have reflux, you can have all these things that negatively affect your voice. But if you just sort of leave it at the voice is this external thing that external factors are acting upon, you lose agency, you lose the ability to make differences and to change the way you're using your voice.
Right.
So that's the other sort of aspect I run into a lot, both in the clinic and in the studio, of people not taking responsibility of their voice.
Ah. And I think that's legitimate in a lot of ways because I think historically, singers have, at least my experience anyway, is that we're all trying to grab bag it. Like, I'm gonna do this exercise and this, but there's no organization to it, and there's no way to think about it logically in terms of muscles and structures because we can't see it. We haven't
Yeah,
been able to see it.
right.
So to me, that is like an artifact of a legit, like, I don't know what's going on here. Most people don't know what's going on here,
Yeah,
which is why we can't stop talking about this, right? Like
yeah.
it's the conversation that's starting to bleed into the mainstream. Like, I can actually do something about this. It's just like going to the gym. So yeah, one of the big things I try to do with people is like 5 minutes a day. What? That's all you want? No, just
Yep,
5 minutes a day. That's it. We just got to start somewhere. It's
totally.
exercise. We're going to the gym. You know what I mean? All that stuff. So to hear
Yep.
you say the last 10 minutes of everything you just talked about, that is pure gold.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Well, yeah, I feel strongly about it, and it's again based on both the experience in the studio and in the clinic. It's just things I run into, and to your point about the artifact of not being able to see what's happening or touch what's happening, that's spot on, and that's why vocology I think is so impactful and has really
Yeah.
made a difference in my own singing, just my exploration and understanding, and I don't sing professionally at all anymore, but even when I just sit down at the piano and sing through some songs, I just have so much more control over my voice because I have such a better sense of what's happening. And I think that in teaching and in the clinic, I don't want to turn habilitation into an anatomy lesson. I don't want to get into the deep science and just throw a bunch of declarative knowledge on people. Right, we
Yeah.
got to
Right.
stick with the
Right.
the procedural aspect of the training. But I do think having a basic, fundamental understanding of how this thing works is empowering, as opposed to just there's this thing, the voice that comes out of me somehow.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. And you're reminding me too that I think about how vocology has impacted my clients and all the people around me, but I haven't really thought about how it's actually impacted. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm a infinitely better singer for having known some of these things and just done the practice myself, and that's just, it's taken forever, but, it's, yeah, that's really interesting.
And I
Wow.
think that's important for any vocalogist to have the experience
Mhm.
of vocalizing themselves. I mean, everybody, just about everybody speaks, but to explore the voice in these unusual athletic ways, which I always honestly I always say singing is not natural. Singing is now, I think it's a fundamental part of being human,
Yes.
right? But in terms of being a natural activity, forget about it. Especially sort of the real refined. I mean, folk music, maybe that sort of comes from a place of it's more spoken like. But if we get into any sort of
Refined sound.
performative, yeah, like operatic
Okay,
musical
gotcha.
theater, kind of that where
Yeah.
people train and are really trying to produce a very specific kind of sound, That's not natural. That that takes training and knowledge and practice, and it doesn't just, you don't open your mouth and sing Aida. That just doesn't happen.
Kind of like the way Michael Jordan or LeBron James is not natural, but it's like yeah, okay.
Yeah, but it looks natural, right? But
Right.
and that's the other thing too, is that
Flawless.
you try to get to the point where what we're doing is efficient
Yes.
and isn't there's not extraneous effort. It's just an example in the singing world. One thing I like is that when people say, "Oh, that sounded high," right?
Yeah.
Because they don't mean that it sounded like a high pitch. They mean that sounded effortful and difficult.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because there's
High
no,
notes
I
are
mean,
hard.
it sounded high. It is what it is. It's high, low, it's all relative. But
Right.
someone's like, "Oh, that sounded high." That means that sounded effortful. Whereas if someone sings a really, like if someone does Queen of the Night, no, and does it beautifully, no one says, "Oh, that sounded high." They go, "Oh, that sounded so effortless
Oh.
and so beautiful and so amazing." Like they use more
Yeah.
positive talking.
Yeah,
So that's
you
an example, sort of like me playing basketball would sound high. I mean, it would not, I did not look like Michael Jordan when I play basketball.
oh my gosh, that's so great. Well, do you have a video that you wanna share with us, perhaps?
Yes. So earlier you had mentioned my MRI video, which was me singing "If I Only Had a Brain" in the MRI machine, and it was demonstrating sort of this new technique that one of my colleagues at University of Illinois had developed to do this real-time dynamic MRI, so we could investigate articulators and so that was a fun video that got several 100,000 views. And I thought that more people would and now see the inside of my head than ever see the outside of my head, which is definitely true. Unless this video goes viral, maybe. I don't know what your following is
It
like.
will, it will. I'm kidding.
Well, little did I know that I would have another viral, actually, a true viral video. So my son last summer worked for he's a physics major at NYU, and he worked for a student organization over the summer developing educational content, and he was doing something on sound and vibration, and he said, "Hey Dad, do you have a video of your vocal folds that you could share with me so I could use it for this educational content I'm developing?" I was like, "Do I video my vocal folds? I scope myself all the time. Sure, I got a video." So I gave him this little pitch demo of me going low, high, and whatnot, and he put it on this web on a YouTube to as part of this educational package. And somehow what we think happened was that some TikTok user picked it up, because people who aren't voice people, they see the vocal folds and they're like, "What alien
Whoa.
thing is happening there?" So this video of my vocal folds doing something what I thought is very basic. Guess how many views it has currently?
I don't know, 100,000,000.
Oh, that was a good guess. No, it's only 24 million.
Oh my gosh.
So now more people will see my vocal folds ever than will see the inside of my head than will see the outside of my head, is
Wow.
progression. So I'll share that link with you for the show notes. It's pretty funny. Again, it's for voice people, it's like a pretty standard. There's nothing that exceptional about it, but for the general population, they were like, "What is happening?"
Whoa. Whoa. So you're true celebrity. This is really exciting to have you now
Except
that I
no
know
one
you're a
knows it's me.
TikTok star.
No one knows it's me or my
We'll
vocal
have to put
folds.
all these things together, so we'll have to figure out how to put all the links in the bottom.
Okay, so here is the demo of my vocal folds. And again, this was just sort of what I thought a run-of-the-mill video. So one thing you'll notice, I've got a little outpouching on my left ventricular fold. That's been there for many years since I've been scoping myself. And here's the video, pretty straightforward. There I am, just doing a pitch glide. My falsetto, same pitch, an octave lower, clearing my throat, low, middle. And that's it. And it's got 24 million views.
That's so cool.
And
And that's on
and
YouTube, right?
that's on YouTube. And yeah, the SPS National is the
Oh,
group, the Students Society of Physics Students.
man. Okay.
And there's a link. In fact, if you want
Gold.
to use this, I think there's a link here.
Yep, I see it. I'm clicking on it. This is gold.
So fun stuff.
Excellent. You know, one of the coolest things about this video, which probably is not exciting to anybody else, is when you the mucosal buildup there,
Yeah,
or the muco or the yeah, mucus buildup,
the
and then you
mucus. Yeah,
clear. I've
yeah.
never seen a video of what happens when you clear your
Oh,
throat.
fun. While I've got you, I'll show this other one. This was an MRI video that was a follow-up to what I did in Illinois. This is done at,
Kylie, yes.
you know, Tylee.
Yes.
Okay. So here's another video from my good friend and colleague Tylee Ross, who as a follow-up to some of the work we did in Illinois, we started to do some MRI work, which we're hopefully going to publish on soon here at NYU. And so he came in and did some test stuff at NYU, and then he made this super cool video, which has a lot of views, legitimate views. This is really good stuff. So you should definitely check out the Singing in the MRI, because he
Mhm.
takes the MRI videos that we made and then he superimposes them and goes back and forth with kind of the video that he recorded himself of the outside of his head. So this is another fun video.
It's very well produced. I love this
Yeah.
one. I use it all the time.
So with regards to sort of my background as a singing teacher and the decision I made when I was, you know, graduating with my PhD and thinking, should I go into the basic sciences or try go back into the singing world? One of my sort of life missions is to continue to support and encourage singing voice research. Now that's hard for me to do directly because I need to get grants from the National Institutes of Health, and singing is a very small part of the population, professional singers. And so even though I think there's health relevance to helping professional singers, it's hard to convince the NIH of that. So one way I've been doing that is by collaborating with singing voice teachers, primarily in New York, but elsewhere as well, to support people who are applying for the Van Lawrence Fellowship, for example. So I worked with Amanda Flynn and Jared Trudeau. They had an acoustic study on belting that they came to me with, and I helped them with the analysis. And we're continuing that work now with MRI work, which is why I thought
Wow.
of that as we were talking about Tylee. I worked with Matt Edwards to, again, do some MRI work that we're hopefully going to be publishing soon, and just finding ways to collaborate with individuals in the singing world who have ideas and, you know, don't have the training or resources to conduct research. And I hope that that is sort of a lifelong part of my career is supporting singing voice research in particular.
Great. That's a fantastic way to end this, because the whole point of these interviews is to just hopefully plant some seeds for other people and get them interested. We need each other. And that's something that Ken Bozeman said in his interview, is that we need, you know, every time you see a client or work with a singer, you're a researcher in a way,
Yes.
if you're paying attention, right? And then the clinical research is necessary. And so that's why vocology to me is so exciting, is because we're all in it together and we all need
Yep.
each other. And so that, yeah, that's great. I hope somebody hears that, really hears that.
And that's where, you know, PAVA really, that's a mission of PAVA as well, is to connect practitioners and researchers. And, you know, Ken and Kitty just did a great address at PAVA the other day, kind of talking about that interplay between the two. And, you know, Ken always says he's not a scientist, and then he explains something in these real scientific terms. So I've been having a friendly debate with him about whether he's a scientist or not. But in any case, PAVA is a great organization for encouraging those relationships. And also, I'll mention they just started a research mentoring program
Oh, okay.
that is designed specifically to match people who are interested in research but may not have the training or the resources to conduct a study, and match them with established researchers who can help mentor them through the process. So that's another new and I think fantastic initiative of PAVA that will be growing. Right now it's focused on abstract submissions for the symposium, but
Hmm.
I think it will be expanding to more broadly connect people in the realm of research.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time today. This has been a very fruitful conversation, and I hope exciting to a lot of people. It's definitely been a thrill for me to just nerd out on voice for a little while with you. So thank you for that. And is it okay if we call you back at some point and maybe do another
Of course.
interview? Okay.
Yeah, of course. I'd love to. This has been a real honor. Of course, I love talking about the voice, and love talking about myself too. So it was an easy time for me to be with you today. Thanks for all your good questions and your interest, and really pleased to do whatever I can to encourage people to get involved with vocology and would encourage anyone who has questions to feel free to reach out to me personally. You can find my contact info on the website or at thevoicescientist.com, or again on Instagram or Twitter at voicescientist. Although again, I'm not the best at social media, so don't. You can follow me, but don't expect to see a lot of great content. I don't post that often.
Noted. Anyway, thank you so much, Aaron. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks. You as well.
Voice matters. Voice matters.